Well, friends, we have now with us Sanjeev Sanyal, author, historian, and principal economic advisor, Ministry of Finance. May I request to start the AV on?
Sanjeev Sanyal, widely regarded as one of Asia's leading economists, Sanjeev Sanyal is an Indian economist, writer, environmentalist, and urban theorist. A Rhodes Scholar and an Eisenhower Fellow, Mr. Sanyal was named Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum in Davos. CNBC profiled him as a young Turk in recognition to his contributions to Asian financial markets. He was also awarded the Eisenhower Fellowship for his work on urban systems. He was earlier managing director and global strategist at Deutsche Bank. We extend a warm welcome to him at the Miracle Discon of Rotary District 3141.
Thank you, Sanjeev. My request, Kamal. Rotary International District 3141 is pleased to honor Sri Sanjeev Sanyal and confer upon him Iconic Indian Award. His contribution to the Asian financial market and urban system today. Anand Utsav, yours truly, Conference Chair Ashwin Shetty, and RIDE and RIPR Kamal Sanghvi on this day.
Thank you very much.
Please. You have a response. Okay, give it to them. Thank you. Before you go, I think let's take out one draw. What do I have to do? Oops. Take out one coin.
All right, here we go. 439.
Well, we are giving you're ready? Can I declare the number? Lucky draw. Can I declare the number? Where is Sanjeev? No, but the link is there or no? Because the number is already there. Okay. The number is 439. I don't know who is he, but 439 is the number, lucky number. No, 602. Well, red color is not to be taken. Yes, Dr. Ratnakar Kulkarni from Rotary Club of Chembur, Mumbai. Congratulations. Sanjeev. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. Usually when I have to speak after lunch, I know my main job is to keep everybody awake. But because we already had some very enthusiastic dancing and then a couple of very enthusiastic speeches, my job has been made a lot easier. Now, what I'm going to try and do over the next 20-25 minutes is the following. Basically, I'm going to talk about the policies of this particular government, but I'm going to basically not, what I'm going to do is give you some sense of why it is we did certain things, so that you get a sense of what the thinking process was, what we were trying to achieve. Obviously, it is for you to judge whether we achieved or did not achieve what we set out to do. But it is the case that over the last 5 years, many tough reforms have been introduced. And I think it's important that you understand what actually was being attempted in this episode. And then, hopefully, to give you some glimpse of the kinds of things that a future government should do in the next round of reforms. Now, we have been reforming our economies for now 27 years. So, in the first 45 odd years that we were free, we had a socialist economy, and really it hampered our economic development severely. But after 1991, for the last 2.5 decades or so, we have been steadily reforming our economy. And as you all know, this has really borne fruit. Today, we are the world's fastest growing economy. We are right now the world's 6th largest economy. By the time this year ends, we will be the world's 5th largest economy, bypassing France. And in addition, if you measure our GDP in terms of purchasing power parity, we are already the world's 3rd largest economy. Now, not bad for a country that a generation ago was basically having a severe economic crisis and had to actually take gold and lease it out in London in order to pay its bills. So this is the good news. The point, however, is what has the last 5 years that we have seen this government, or little less than 5 years, what has this government been attempting to do? And I'm going to make the case that the main thing that this government was trying to do was essentially to create the basis of another generation of growth by introducing a bunch of reforms. So let me take you back to around about 2013-14. What was the issue then? The issue was that we had in the previous 5 years seen reasonable growth. Now, politicians will debate exactly how high the growth was, 6.8 or 7 or whatever. It doesn't really matter. The growth itself was actually not terribly bad, given that, of course, we had just gone through a severe financial crisis worldwide. So the growth performance of India in the period from 2008 to 2013 was actually okay. In fact, I would argue it was even reasonably good. The problem was that despite this growth, Indian economy was facing all kinds of macro instability. Many of you will remember we had very high inflation going into double digits, 8 to 10, 11% sometimes. We had serious issues with the banking system lending out large amounts of money. And there were serious issues with our current account deficit, fiscal deficit occasionally being 4, 5, 6%. So what was this government when it came into power? What was it trying to do? The first and most important thing that this government was attempting to do was simply to impose order. This is very important to understand. And this is essentially the basis from which I'm going to start off. What Prime Minister Modi is attempting to do is to take away India from one that was based on patronage relationships, based on rent seeking, to one that is effectively a rules-based economy. This is very important to understand. So let me explain what are the various steps that were taken to do this. The first and most important thing that the government was trying to do, as I told you, was simply to bring macroeconomic stability back. And in order to do that, the first thing it attempted to do was to bring inflation down. To do that, a monetary policy committee-based framework was created. So the RBI was given a monetary policy committee, and with clear targets that it had to target inflation at 4% with a band of 2 percentage points on either side. Now remember, this is a country that has historically had inflation in the 8, 9, 10% range. you're suddenly going to push inflation down by 500 basis points. And so this was put together. Now this is, anywhere in the world you attempted to bring down inflation by 500 basis points, you would actually get a recession. But ladies and gentlemen, we have done it. Last 4 years, we have managed to continuously keep inflation in that target zone. In fact, right now, inflation is at 2%. And some people would argue that it's perhaps too low. But this change is a very major change. Why is it such an important change? It's important because until we had managed to get inflation somehow down on a structural basis, we could not also bring down the cost of capital. So one of the major problems that India has as an economy is the following, that whether it's our businesses trying to expand domestically, or the government trying to borrow, or we trying to compete with exports abroad, our problem is that our companies borrow at, if you're a big company, at 10%, if you're a small company, sometimes at 12%, in fact, a few years ago, 13, 14%. Now, how can we possibly compete with China where people can borrow at 6%? So the only way you can do it is by first bringing inflation down, and then over the subsequent years, and something that we now need to do, is to bring down our inflation rate substantially. The first and most painful bit is done. We now need to work over the next several years to slowly bring down our cost of capital so that our businesses can begin to invest in large capacities the way China builds factories. We cannot do this with this current level of cost of capital. The second important thing we wanted to do is to create an internal market. Why was this important? Well, because we had a strange system where every state has its own tax system. So it was actually easier for Mumbai to trade with Shanghai than for Mumbai to trade with Delhi. You'll remember this if you ever travel down Indian highways. Every time you approached a state boundary, there would be queues of trucks standing there waiting for hours, if not days, lots of corruption, all kinds of problems. Now, this is not a new problem this government discovered. The issue of uniting India into one tax system was debated for decades. In fact, it was debated when I was in high school. And I was in high school in Kolkata, so you can imagine we really debated this. Now, after all this debate, this thing was not done because it was going to be, whenever we did it, a very complicated exercise. Now, ultimately, we decided to take the plunge in July 2017. When we did it, everybody told us, but you know, you're not fully prepared. If only you do some more planning, you will do it better. But the fact of the matter is, when you are introducing such a complicated change in such a complicated country like ours, the only way to find out what will happen when you introduce such a big change is to do it. No amount of theorizing, I can tell you, was going to help you. So, knowing fully well that in the first few months this new system was not going to work, we introduced it. Yes, there are many things that went wrong, but let me tell you, none of the things that went wrong when we introduced GST were the things that we had been warned about. They were all things that nobody had told us. Nobody told us that the error correction button on the website wouldn't work. Nobody told us that the tax refunds to the exporters would get stalled. All of these things we discovered by virtually doing it. Otherwise, we would still be debating this whole issue. But it is done, ladies and gentlemen, and 18 months later, we have a system that may not be perfect, but is a system that is a dramatic improvement on what we used to have. And it's done. And your grandchildren will broadly be using this same system in some form. I hope that they will also have improved it. As the finance minister said, we ourselves intend to reduce the number of slabs over a period of time by bringing the middle two brands of 12 and 18 down to something in the middle and further clean it up. But the fact is, this transition, which is painful in every country that has attempted it, is done. You did it, ladies and gentlemen. The third big change that we had to do was to clean up our business culture and specifically our banks and the system of creative destruction of our economic system. One of the previous speakers was talking all about frauds. And yes, we did have a business culture that really was all over the place. This is not because we Indians are somehow congenitally criminal. Some people may believe that, but looking the way we drive, but let me assure you that is not the case. The reason is that the environment we find ourselves in, the cultural context we find ourselves in, forces us in some ways to behave in certain ways. It's also true of our driving. After all, the same Indian who drives like a lunatic here in Mumbai or Delhi will go to Singapore or London, etc., and drive perfectly sanely. I know this because I do it myself. In fact, if I attempted to drive in Delhi the way I drive in Singapore, I would probably have a car crash because nobody else would believe I'm keeping to my lane. So, what did we need to do? We needed to change the business culture. So in order to do that, we introduced one much tougher regulations on our banking system, and we began to unwind a major flaw in the way our financial system worked, which was that you had a rent-seeking system where a relatively small group of people captured huge resources from the banking system and simply refused to pay, going into tens of thousands of crores. And this was a situation where if they succeeded in their business by doing whatever they did, they made a lot of money, but if they failed, it didn't matter because the banks, which were obviously very often state-controlled or at least controlled by their family and friends in some fashion, would simply evergreen them forever. And this business culture of evergreening and rent-seeking pervaded our system to such an extent that even, there was a general suspicion, even if there is actually a genuine business failure happening, everybody suspected that there was something non-kosher about it. So starting around about 2015, we began to force the banks to recognize these assets as non-performing assets. For 15, 16, they were recognized, but simply recognizing them is not good enough. We've now got to unwind them. So we began to use a completely brand new tool called the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. This was introduced in 2016, and we began to use this completely brand new tool to begin to take these very large assets and liquidate them or sell them off or whatever it is. Now, when we began to do this, ladies and gentlemen, actually, the new NCLAT, NCLT courts did not exist. We had no idea how the new law would fare when we actually took it to court. We had no processes, we did not have insolvency professionals. In fact, we had no idea how it would work out. And yet, we identified the 12 largest cases, which accounted incidentally for 25% of the bad stuff, and we put it into the system. And this happened somewhere in the middle of 2017. And since then, I can say that many of these very, very large cases have already got done or are very, very close to getting done. And again, literally, some tens of thousands of crores are being paid back. And ironically, in some cases, some of the original business promoters are willing to come back and repay all the money right up front. Now the question is, if they had the money in their backyard, why weren't they paying it in the first place? So this was an important point that we were trying to do. I've just given you 3 examples of what we were attempting to do in order to impose some order into the system, kill the old system of rent seeking, and create a new framework of governance. 3 examples, all of them painful. Bring down inflation and structurally lower it, impose an order on the banking system and use an insolvency and bankruptcy code to clean it up, and to, of course, introduce a completely new tax system. We've also done many other things. We've tried to impose order on the real estate sectors through RERA and many other things. Some may have succeeded better than others. That I'll let you judge. But I wanted you to know what we were trying to do. And I wanted to come here and thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen, because to the extent it has succeeded at all, it is because many of you have helped us do this. And I know all of these were painful reforms. But at some point in our history, we had to do this. And in a country where for the most trivial of things, we end up with having, you'll have riots on the streets for the most ridiculous of things. We have gone through all these painful reforms, and many of you have grumbled, but we have done it. This insolvency and bankruptcy code that I just talked about, well, I can tell you 100 years from now, some variant of this same law will still be in place. So we have actually done major changes that are done once in many generations, and we have done it. And we have survived it. Many of you I know have grumbled about it, but you have in the end sided with these reforms and allowed us to do it. And to be in a moment of history where we could have done these major reforms and gotten away with it would have been a total waste. So we did it. Now, I have some bad news for you, which is, if this government is given another opportunity for 5 more years, or at least whoever is the next government comes in and wants to listen to economists like me, then you're in for even more pain. So let me tell you the kinds of reforms we will attempt, and let me assure you they will all be painful. The first and most important reform that India needs to do in the next round is judicial reform. We cannot claim to be a civilized country with 34 million cases stuck in our judicial system. You look at any problem in India, you wind it down, you'll find somewhere in there it is because of severe judicial delays. Now, the basis of any market-based economy is enforcement of contracts. If we cannot have routine enforcement of contracts done by a judicial system, or at least not in any reasonable time frame, then we cannot hope to make the next step forward. So let me state it here clear. If you had asked me a decade ago, what was the biggest constraints to the Indian economy, I would have probably said something like hard infrastructure, connecting our cities, building better highways or airports, etc. Now, although these may not be perfect, we have by and large managed to solve this problem. Our airports are pretty decent. Our highways are not all perfect, but some of them are certainly of international quality. Our communication system are decent enough and improving rapidly, and so on and so forth. Now, the single biggest constraint to the Indian economy is our judicial system, and we have to do something about it. And let me tell you, this is something I'm working on. I'm producing a lot of material, pushing, cajoling, and whipping up public support for this from people like you. So this is number one reform. The second most important reform we need to do is to finally begin to reform our administrative reform. We have a policing and bureaucratic system that is now an overlay of a colonial era bureaucracy, overlaid by a socialist era bureaucracy, overlaid by various market institutions and regulators, etc., that we introduced since 1991. And the net result of all of this is that we have layer upon layer upon layer of vetoes. And this has made the whole thing increasingly difficult to run. Just to give you an example, every time I go abroad, believe it or not, even if it is for something that has been planned for months, international conference or summit or something which has been planned months in advance, I will still have to go through 26 separate signatures just to go abroad every time. Now, this is the kind of vetoed system, and anyone in that system can veto it for the most ridiculous of reasons. And this, by the way, many of you run businesses will know this. Everybody has a veto, nobody has an ability to push forward the thing. So, we need to do these administrative reforms. Again, this too will be painful, because of course many of these reforms will have to be done by the very people who are being reformed. So this will not be easy. When it is being carried out, it will be disruptive. But in both these cases, the good news is, I think there are elements both in the judiciary and in the administrative system who genuinely want to push through these reforms. They know what to do. And frankly, I don't think they are going to be any more difficult to do than what we have already done. If somebody had told me 5-6 years ago that we would have introduced the GST, I would not have believed it. If somebody told me we would actually have an insolvency and bankruptcy code, I would not have believed it. We have done it. So we can do these things. The third reform that we need to do is somewhat different. You see, what we have done in terms of hard infrastructure over the last few years is connect up all the cities. So the interconnections between cities have dramatically improved. Just in the last 2 years, 35 new airports have been operationalized. So now you can very quickly fly right from Mumbai to the extremes of the country. But the intra-city, i.e. the infrastructure inside the cities, is still in very bad shape. And with migration and urbanization, we need to do something about this very, very rapidly. So the third area of major reform is going to be municipal and urban reform inside the cities. Now, you're already beginning to get some taste of it already. Delhi, for example, did not have a metro system just a decade ago. Today, with just 100 kilometers of new lines being raised in the last 12 months, Delhi has the 4th largest metro network in the world. And we are now introducing metro systems all over the country. One of them is coming up right in the city. And now to show you how major this change is for a city like Mumbai, remember, basically, Mumbai is a strange city. It's based on 2 highways, one on the east and one on the west, and 2 train lines. Now, those 2 train lines were laid out in the 19th century. Till the air-conditioned bogies began to be introduced very recently, the design of the train rakes had not been updated since 1920. That is those train rakes from which you know those famous photographs of people hanging out of the train. Well, they're hanging out of the train not necessarily because it's crowded inside, because it's so bloody hot. So these designs are finally getting updated and upgraded. You have already seen huge amount of construction going on underneath the city, and we expect that in about 24 months or thereabouts, you'll begin to see trains running through it. A completely new road system, a third leg of the road system is being introduced along the western coast. So that's a 50% increase in the road, sort of arterial roads in the country, the third one. So with this, I'm just giving you one example of how we are beginning to upgrade our cities. This is not just of the very largest cities. Some of the smaller cities are also doing very well. Gangtok, for example, has just got a new airport. So bringing that, now pretty much I think all our major state capitals have an airport, including the difficult ones like Sikkim. But we are also beginning to experiment, do some interesting experiments with municipal services. Not far from here, you have the city of Indore. And those of you who have visited Indore before 2 years ago will remember that it was a fairly typical, dusty, chaotic, polluted industrial town. But if you visited it more recently, you will know that it has been dramatically cleaned up. This is a model that can be replicated, and we intend to replicate this across the country. There are other examples as well. For example, old cities are being upgraded in various ways. If any of you are here from Amritsar or have visited Amritsar in the last year or so, will know that the area around the Golden Temple, which used to be a real mess, has been cleaned up to world standards, and it's a fantastic place to visit. We are now beginning to do this in Varanasi. Please visit Varanasi. Some amazing infrastructure is being put in place at the back end, but the front end where the old city is, we will of course try to maintain the lanes and by-lanes and try it, but there also you will see more or less all the overhanging wires, etc. have been removed. So, step by step by step, we are building a new India. And ladies and gentlemen, hope to see you there. Thank you.
I think little louder. That's the power of youth. And Sanjeev, I also have a dream. You know, you are talking about building the infrastructure and all that. I have a dream. A dream is this, which we all have seen in past. Can we make India so powerful that 1 rupee will become $1?
As an economist, let me say that is not a good idea, and I'll tell you why. You see, never confuse your currency with economic strength. Because when Japan had a yen at 250 to the dollar, it had a rapidly growing economy. When it became 80 to the dollar, its economy slowed. So don't worry about the rupee, keep the economy growing. So, don't.
Well, there's wonderful to say, but I always say in a lot of times that because, you know, imagine that if 1 rupee will become, I mean, I'm not comparing in those terms economy, but I'm comparing if 1 rupee become the dollar, which is 72, even a 5,000 rupees person who is earning a month, actually is earning is 3.5 lakh rupees. That's what that's what I try to say. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sanjeev.